I wanted to ask, like, we were talking about like systems of oppression before. Some people from the far right would say that it's a kind of self-help versus the system that we live in. So what they would say is that we currently live in a capitalist system. You can apparently end quote takes a lot of people out of poverty into wealth compared to other systems. So just suck it up, work hard, don't complain. You know, other ruling classes and all that in the past were even worse than this. So be grateful and just work hard. Versus on the left, it's all, you need to fight the oppression. And how the right side kind of make it seem like is that the oppression that exists is too exaggerated. So it's not to the degree that you guys seem to portray it is. So what would you say Islam falls in the spectrum of self-help versus we got to change the system? Because how it seems like, from my personal perspective, and to certain like ulama scholars that talk to a certain group, I'm not going to say all, but some of them opt for the more be grateful of the system you live in and
change your condition is the kind of slogan that they use. It's like,
change yourself to change the world around you. And they'll quote, I think there's a Quranic ayah or hadith similar to that.
I actually remember asking you a similar question a couple of years ago. You definitely don't remember, but I asked you, how can we be engaged in political activism when we ourselves are not, necessarily
at a certain level.
At a certain level of spirituality.
Level.
And therefore it's like, how can you clean up? Like if you try and mop or clean a floor and your shoes are dirty, it's going to create more of a mess, and you're just going to be chasing a tail.
Take the shoes off. Take the shoes
analogy.
off.
Oh, but your feet are dirty as well.
Have a shower.
That's it. You got to clean. You got to clean yourself first, though, before you clean the floor.
Oh my god, I've been refuted. my own analogies.
Just in big red letters off my bed that refuted.
Okay,
that's our thumbnail for the video.
Let's try and back off a bit here and start with the other one, because again, we're starting off with this left-right structural self-help, in your words, self-help versus changing society.
We won't use terms. We'll just say there's a spectrum of there's a spectrum of self-help versus systems. You could sit like anyone on that spectrum, but where does Islam kind of fall in that?
So I just want to talk about that first and then come to Islam, because otherwise, again, we're just assuming that this is a universal framework and we're sort of doing that projection.
Context.
And I might reframe this in terms of structural diagnosis of society versus sort of more individualistic one. So you're looking at the problem. Everyone can see that society has problems, and it always has problems because it's a human endeavor. Some people are more sort of, the problems are structural, societal, collective level, institutional, and others are more like, it's about the individual. And obviously there's a very particular framing of that when we talk about left, right, conservative, liberal, socialist, capitalist, whatnot. Now, if we come to Islam, again, you'd probably want to take it from a completely indigenous approach. But since we're making comparisons, I would say that Islam is much more to the structural side of things. I wouldn't place it within that spectrum because it's going to bring a lot of other baggage with it. But if we're just looking at sort of, do you sort of achieve, I think everyone agrees that the end goal is some sort of societal improvement, societal revival, right? Not to establish a utopia, but some sort of improvement, some sort of significant improvement in how society operates. And it's just about, some people are saying, well, the path to that is individual, family, community, and others sort of saying, no, you got to focus a bit more on the institutions. I think my view is that Islam is much more on the latter side. And for me, it's like, if you look at the Prophet ﷺ's seerah, you see that very clearly, that he only spends 10, 13 years in Mecca, and you can see that very early on he moves from focusing on individuals to focusing on the points of power and the institutions, and what he does. So what he does is not invite individuals in Mecca, and then when that stagnates, go somewhere else and do it there, and then go somewhere else and do it there.
Because the spiritual people
would do that. That's what they say, right? But that's why I think it's a misreading of the seerah. What he does is he in Mecca he starts on that couple of years, and even then he's still focusing on like influential people more than others, and the rest of Mecca from like year 3 to year 9, 10 and to the end is really a focus on trying to establish some sort of base, which is why he does Medina. He
Yeah.
walks in Medina with authority. And I think people just
100%.
miss that reading there as to how you go from the latter parts of the Meccan phase, and in fact, large part of the Meccan phase, into Medina. Like he walks in, he doesn't walk into Mecca as a preacher, as a missionary,
Subhanallah.
yeah, where he's going to talk to individuals, and he doesn't do that.
Yeah.
He sends Mus'ab to do that, and Mus'ab does that to an extent for a year, but again, not in the individual sense. But the Prophet walks in with authority. He walks in and he writes a constitution, what we would call a constitution, a little bit anachronistically, but he writes a document that is defining the broad parameters of the polity which he leads, right? And then you can see that in Medina, all of a sudden the revelation now changes. You've got economic rules coming in and social rules, and the ahkam completely change, right? So that's a huge topic in itself, but I think clearly it shows us that Islam's focus is more radical change in that sense. And I think I would say that even in human history, let alone Islamic or Muslim history, you don't find anywhere where you go like individual and then family and so on and so forth. It just doesn't work that way, because it's not just whether we're going individuals or institutions. You're missing the point that the institutions have a massive influence on the individuals, and the struggle is not in a vacuum. It works both ways. But I think we can unpack a lot of this.
I actually agree with you, because what I've realized is that, for example, when I read specific situations in the seerah, like Rasul Sallallahu might be traveling somewhere and bumps into like a family. He's not like straight away giving that, oh, do you know about Islam, this and that. It's more like normal interactions, but you have convoys and groups of people from different faith groups come to him to like meet with him, and then he sends them back to their tribe to, if they convert, priest superiority of Islam. So it's not as, I guess, how we've been growing up. Rasul Sallallahu went to every house and door to door knocking, and it's not like that.
Yeah, no, I didn't do any door to door knocking.
like the Mormons. Is the Mormons?
Yeah,
They're often coming around to my place.
Yeah.
So would you say because of those encounters, it's not like he was just focusing on like grassroots, for example. There was a bigger power dynamics in play that he was trying to seize.
In other words, the point I would make is that from the Prophet ﷺ's example, what we realize is the way that Allah Ta'ala seeks for us to, or commands us to go about societal change is, again, and some people sort of go top, bottom, bottom, top, and that really, I don't like that sort of framework. It really like dumbs down the whole thing, because it's not top down and it's not bottom up. It depends on what you mean. If you mean by bottom up, like again, that sort of 1 plus 2 plus 3, you get 100, you get 10,000, and then somehow, it's not that clearly, but it's not top down either. Like you got to do some groundwork, but I'd like to say it's more bottom up. It's more bottom, but with a focus on the top, if that makes sense. Like you're working on the grassroots, but the way you seek to achieve more comprehensive societal change is not 1 plus 1 plus 1. It's by taking control of the institutions on the basis of something you have on the ground, right? On the basis of, so not like a coup, but on the basis of a strong public opinion that you've established on the ground, and an acceptance for the new way of life on the ground, as we see in Medina.
Yeah, and it's obviously not going to be the case that if your movement or your government is entirely unpopular amongst the people, that you'd be able to sustain government for an extended period of time anyway.
And the point is not power. This is the other point. It's not the state or the Khilafah is not an end in Islam, right? As it may be, for example, in some versions of Marxism or communism, where it's like the state represents, a certain end game. It's a means. It's purely a means of implementing Islam. Riba's haram. Apart from me as an individual abstaining from getting a mortgage from the Commonwealth Bank, even though they keep sort of going to me, look, you can do this much and that much. But at a societal level, the influence of riba is immense, right? It's negative impacts, but you can't do anything about that on an individual level. It needs to be prohibited in society. It needs to be prohibited in society. There's no other way you can do that except with political authority, right? And that's just one example of one rule. And so the point is, it's acquiring that power, acquiring that authority is to establish and implement
See,
Islam
like
in the way
some-
that the Prophet ﷺ did.
So some factions of the